He joked he'd marry the Plainest. The four-armed warrior laughed. Want my daughter? Beat me first. Derek Valen had always been known for his bold humor and sharp tongue. As a young human diplomat, he had spent more time in alien territories than most of his fellow Earthlings, learning the complex ways of intergalactic politics and negotiation. But at the dinner table of the Zarkar Prime Embassy, he found himself in a situation unlike any other. The night had begun like any other formal dinner. The sleek silver cutlery clinked against fine china, and the shimmering lights from the grand chandelier reflected off the faces of the galaxy's most powerful beings. Derek, wearing his usual confident grin, had taken a seat at the far end of the table, surrounded by dignitaries and warriors from across the stars. He had been introduced to the Zarkar species earlier in the day, their towering bodies and four muscular arms making a lasting impression. While they were known for their strength and fierce battles, Derek had never been one to shy away from cracking a joke, even at the most serious of occasions. With a smirk, he leaned over to the ambassador sitting beside him and joked, "I'd marry the plainest woman in the galaxy just to keep things simple." The room fell silent for a moment as the guests processed his words. Then, as if on cue, laughter echoed around the table. It was a light-hearted comment, and Derek thought little of it. But he hadn't anticipated the reaction from one particular figure sitting across the room. Sakthar, the towering four-armed warrior and head of the Zarkar people, stood up from his seat. His massive frame loomed over the table as his deep voice echoed in the hall. "You think you would marry the Plainest?" Sakthar's voice rumbled, causing everyone to fall quiet once more. "If you truly believe so, then you must prove it." Derek raised an eyebrow. Was this some kind of alien custom or another prank? He hadn't expected his small quip to draw such attention. But Sakthar, with his broad grin, leaned closer and added, "You wish to marry my daughter? Beat me first." The room went dead silent. Derek's eyes widened. What had he gotten himself into? The warrior's words were not a joke. It was clear that Sakthar's offer was serious, as the entire room awaited Derek's response. Sakthar's daughter, Zyra, stood from her seat. She was tall, with a fierce glint in her eyes and the strength of a warrior. Her beauty was not what Derek had expected. It wasn't the delicate, gentle kind he was used to, but rather the beauty of someone who could face any challenge without hesitation. There was power in her presence, and it took Derek by surprise when she walked toward him. "Father speaks in jest," Zyra said, her voice steady and confident. She smiled, though it wasn't entirely kind. "But I'd like to see you try." Derek, caught between amusement and disbelief, looked back at the faces around him. Everyone seemed to be watching, waiting to see how he would react. He could feel the weight of the challenge settling on him. Was this a test of strength or a diplomatic misunderstanding? Either way, he had a reputation to uphold. "Well," Derek said, standing up from the table with a light chuckle, "if it's a test of strength you want, I suppose I'll have to give it my best shot." He couldn't help but smile. If there was one thing Derek knew, it was how to talk his way out of awkward situations. But this was different. Sakthar didn't seem to mind Derek's lack of physical strength. The warrior, towering over the human diplomat, found Derek's bravery admirable. His laughter echoed in the hall again, a deep, hearty sound that made the entire room vibrate. "Good. Let us see if the human has any true strength in him," Sakthar said. Zyra's gaze softened slightly, as if intrigued by Derek's unexpected calmness. Her lips parted as if to say something, but she remained silent, watching him closely. Derek couldn't tell if she was testing him or if she truly found something interesting about him. As the challenge was set, the atmosphere in the room changed. The guests all stood, murmuring to each other as they anticipated the first challenge. Derek had no idea what to expect, but one thing was certain: this wasn't just about a joke anymore. It was about something deeper. Sakthar motioned for them to step forward. A small, open arena had been set up in the center of the room, surrounded by alien warriors who now looked at Derek with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. It was clear they didn't believe the human would stand a chance. Zyra, still watching closely, began to walk away, but before she left, she paused and looked back at Derek. "If you're serious about this," she said, her voice low but firm, "then don't expect this to be easy. My father doesn't lose." Derek nodded, his grin still in place. He wasn't going to back down, no matter how impossible the task seemed. If there was one thing he had learned in his time as a diplomat, it was that anything could be negotiated with the right kind of resolve. This wasn't about winning the fight, it was about proving something far more important, that humans could stand toe-to-toe with the strongest. "Don't worry," Derek said, his voice steady. "I didn't come all this way to back down now." The crowd watched in silence as Derek stepped into the arena. Sakthar moved to face him, his stance confident and powerful. The first challenge was about to begin, and Derek knew it would take more than strength to win this one. It would take everything he had. Derek stepped into the arena, his heart beating faster with every step. The room had fallen completely silent, and all eyes were on him. He could feel the weight of the challenge pressing down on him, but he refused to let it show. His posture remained confident, though deep inside, he had no idea what kind of test he was about to face. Sakthar's imposing form loomed before him, his four muscular arms crossed over his chest in an almost casual manner, though the look in his eyes was anything but casual. The alien warriors surrounding the arena watched with keen interest, their eyes full of judgment. It was clear they didn't expect the human to stand a chance. Derek had heard enough about the Zarkar people to know they were a proud and battle-hardened race. To them, strength was everything, and only the strongest survived. "Are you ready, human?" Sakthar's deep voice echoed, sending a shiver through the room. His forearms flexed, each as large as Derek's entire torso. Derek took a deep breath. He had been in tough situations before, but this one was different. This was not some diplomatic disagreement or negotiation where words could sway the situation. This was about survival, but Derek knew that words, if used correctly, could still be his most powerful weapon. It was time to rely on his wit, even if the odds were stacked against him. "I'm ready," Derek replied, his voice steady, though his stomach was tight. He didn't know what the trial would involve, but he wasn't going to show any weakness. He could already hear the low murmurs from the crowd, some of them mocking him, others waiting for him to fail. Sakthar grinned, a knowing look in his eyes. "Then let's see what you've got." The challenge began with no warning. Sakthar lunged forward with surprising speed for someone so massive. Derek barely had time to react. The Zarkar's large hand shot out, aiming to grab him by the shoulders. Derek ducked just in time, the warrior's hand swiping through the air above his head. Derek rolled to the side, his movements quick but not graceful. He had barely got to his feet when Sakthar swung a fist at him, a blow that would have crushed any ordinary human. Derek scrambled backward, narrowly dodging the punch. His heart raced, but he was quick to regain his composure. This wasn't a fight he could win by sheer force. He had to be smarter. He needed to outthink the warrior, not outmuscle him. The Zarkar warrior's next move was a flurry of strikes, his four arms coming at Derek from all directions. Each blow was aimed with deadly precision, but Derek managed to dodge most of them. His reflexes were sharp, honed from years of navigating tense political situations. But he wasn't fast enough to avoid everything. Sakthar's fist clipped Derek's side, sending him stumbling back, his ribs aching from the impact. The crowd gasped, some cheering, others jeering. But Derek shook off the pain. He couldn't afford to give up now. He had to show them all that humans weren't as weak as they seemed. Derek's mind raced. He had to think of a way to counterattack. He looked around the arena, his eyes scanning for any advantage. The Zarkar warriors were known for their physical strength, but they weren't known for agility. Derek wasn't as strong, but he had something else: creativity. He spotted a pile of metal pipes near the edge of the arena. Without thinking, Derek dashed toward them, narrowly avoiding another punch from Sakthar. He grabbed one of the pipes, using it to block a strike that would have knocked him out cold. Sakthar paused for a moment, surprised by Derek's sudden shift in tactics. Derek took the opening and swung the pipe at the warrior's legs, causing Sakthar to stumble slightly. It wasn't much, but it gave Derek a moment of breathing space. "You're more resourceful than I thought," Sakthar grunted, recovering quickly. "But resourcefulness won't win this fight." "Maybe not," Derek replied, grinning despite the pain, "but it might help me survive." Sakthar didn't reply. Instead, he charged again, but this time Derek was ready. He ducked under a wild punch and used his momentum to vault himself onto Sakthar's back, wrapping his legs around the warrior's torso. He wasn't strong enough to hold Sakthar in a headlock, but he knew that Sakthar's size was his greatest weakness. The larger they were, the more difficult it became to move quickly. Sakthar roared in frustration, trying to shake Derek off, but Derek held on tightly, using his weight to drag the massive warrior down. He felt the ground beneath him tremble with each movement, but he refused to let go. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the fight continued. Derek could feel the sweat on his brow, his muscles screaming in protest, but he kept his grip tight. Every move he made was calculated, not for strength, but for survival. He wasn't trying to defeat Sakthar, he was just trying to stay alive long enough to show them that he could hold his own. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Sakthar's struggles slowed. Derek's grip tightened as he adjusted himself to bring the Zarkar warrior to the ground. With one final move, he used his legs to push off, forcing Sakthar onto his back. Derek landed on top of him, his breathing heavy but his eyes focused. The arena was dead quiet. Derek's heart pounded in his chest as he stood over Sakthar, still gripping the pipe tightly in his hands. He hadn't won the fight, not yet, but he had survived. And that, in this moment, was enough. Sakthar slowly raised his head, a surprised look in his eyes. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The silence stretched out, and Derek wondered if this was it. Would Sakthar attack again, or had he finally proven his worth? Then, slowly, the giant warrior broke into a wide grin, his massive teeth showing in a toothy smile. "You have spirit, human," Sakthar said, his voice rumbling with approval. "I see now why my daughter is intrigued by you." Derek let out a relieved breath, his legs wobbling with exhaustion. "I'm glad you approve." "You've passed the first trial," Sakthar said, his tone turning more serious. "But there are many more challenges ahead. This was only the beginning." Derek nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. "I'm ready for whatever comes next." As the crowd erupted into applause, Derek knew that his journey was far from over. He had won the first round, but the real challenge was still to come. And if he wanted to prove himself to Sakthar and his people, he would have to dig deeper than he ever had before. But for now, he had earned a moment of victory, and that in itself was a small but important step forward. The days following the first trial were a blur for Derek. The intensity of the fight with Sakthar had left him exhausted, but he couldn't afford to rest. Word of his survival spread quickly throughout the Zarkar camp, and the warriors watched him with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. They weren't used to seeing a human withstand a challenge like the one Derek had just faced. But Derek knew that surviving one trial wasn't enough. He had to prove himself not just to Sakthar, but to the entire Zarkar race. Zyra's presence lingered in his thoughts. Since the fight, she hadn't spoken to him much, but Derek could sense her eyes on him when he trained. There was something about her fierce independence, her quiet strength. She wasn't like the other warriors. She didn't seek attention, but there was a depth to her that intrigued him. One evening, after a long day of training, Derek was practicing with a wooden staff, trying to improve his footwork. The motions felt awkward at first, his body not used to the heavy, deliberate movements of a warrior. Sweat trickled down his face as he tried to make each strike more fluid, more precise. He didn't have the strength to fight like Sakthar or the other Zarkar, but he could outthink them. That was the key. A voice broke his concentration. "You're making it harder than it needs to be." Derek turned around, his grip tightening on the staff. Standing a few feet away, arms crossed, was Zyra. Her posture was relaxed, but her eyes were sharp. "You could learn faster if you stopped trying to force it," she continued, her tone calm but firm. "Your body is not built for this. You'll never match Sakthar in strength, but you can beat him with your mind." Derek set the staff down, feeling a slight wave of frustration. "That's easy for you to say. You were born to fight like this. I'm just trying to survive." Zyra tilted her head slightly, as if considering his words. Then she stepped forward, grabbing the staff from his hands and twirling it effortlessly. "Surviving is one thing, but winning, that requires something more." She demonstrated a few moves with the staff, each movement graceful and precise. Derek watched closely, trying to memorize the techniques. She made it look so effortless, but Derek could tell that her every move was calculated. It wasn't just strength, it was strategy, timing, and understanding the opponent's weaknesses. "You see," Zyra continued, "you don't need to match their strength. You just need to understand where they're vulnerable. Every warrior, even my father, has a weakness. It's your job to find it." Derek nodded, absorbing the advice. "All right, teach me." For the next few hours, Zyra worked with him. She corrected his stance, showed him how to move with purpose, not just force. Derek wasn't a quick learner, but he could feel himself improving with each swing of the staff. With Zyra's guidance, his movements became smoother, more fluid. He could feel his body adjusting to the rhythm of combat, even though it was nothing like the fighting he had known before. As the sun began to set, the training session ended. Derek was exhausted, but there was a sense of accomplishment that he hadn't felt before. Zyra, on the other hand, didn't seem tired at all. Her energy seemed endless, her focus unwavering. "You're getting better," she said, offering him a rare smile. "But this is just the beginning. If you're serious about beating my father, you'll need to learn more than just fighting." Derek raised an eyebrow. "More?" Zyra nodded. "Strategy. The way to win isn't always through brute force. It's about understanding the terrain, knowing when to strike, when to retreat. My father's used to fighting with power, but power doesn't always win." Derek thought about this as they walked back to the camp. The moonlight cast long shadows over the training ground, and the air was cooler now, a refreshing change from the hot days. The next day, the second trial began. Derek wasn't sure what to expect, but he knew it would be harder than the first. Sakthar had warned him that each trial would push him further, testing not just his strength but his resolve. This trial was different, though. It wasn't a physical contest. Instead, it would be a test of wit, strategy, and survival. Sakthar called Derek and a few other warriors to the arena. The challenge was set. They would be thrown into the wilds of Zarkar Prime, a dangerous, untamed wilderness full of predators and harsh terrain. They would have to survive for 3 days, using only what they could carry. Derek felt a mix of nervousness and excitement. Survival wasn't something he was used to, but he knew this was his chance to prove his worth. This was the kind of challenge that required more than just brute force. It required intelligence, and he was ready to prove that humanity had more to offer than just physical strength. The group of warriors was dropped into the heart of the wilderness, far from the safety of the camp. The environment was unforgiving. The terrain was rugged, and the air was thick with the scent of alien plants and creatures. Derek's heart raced as he surveyed the landscape. They had no weapons, no supplies, only their instincts and what they could scavenge from the environment. The other warriors quickly split into smaller groups, each taking a different route. Derek, however, decided to go alone. He wasn't sure he could trust the other warriors, and besides, he didn't want to follow their methods. He had his own plan. He started by finding a high vantage point. From there, he could see the landscape and plan his route. The first lesson he'd learned from Zyra was to never rush into things without considering his surroundings. The last thing he wanted was to get caught in the open without a plan. The hours passed quickly as he made his way through the wilderness, using his resourcefulness to find food and water. It wasn't easy, but it wasn't impossible either. He built a makeshift shelter, using fallen branches and leaves to create a small fort. As night fell, Derek settled in, taking a moment to reflect on the progress he'd made. The next day brought even greater challenges. Derek had to navigate through dense forests, climb steep hills, and avoid dangerous creatures. His body was sore from the constant exertion, but he didn't stop. He had to keep moving, keep pushing forward. On the third day, Derek encountered his greatest challenge. A large predator, a massive creature with scales and claws, emerged from the shadows. Derek froze, his mind racing. This wasn't something he could outfight. He had to outthink it. Using the skills he had learned from Zyra, Derek created a diversion, leading the creature away from his shelter. It was a close call, but Derek's quick thinking saved him. When he finally made it back to the camp, battered and exhausted, Derek felt a sense of accomplishment. He had survived, using his mind as much as his body. He hadn't relied on brute strength to get through the trial. He had relied on his ingenuity, his ability to adapt to the situation. Sakthar was waiting for him when he returned. The massive warrior looked at him with a mixture of surprise and respect. "You survived," Sakthar said, his voice deep and approving. "I thought you would fail, human, but you've shown me something I didn't expect. Maybe there's more to you than I thought." Derek smiled, though it was a tired smile. "I told you I'd be here for the long haul." Zyra approached, her eyes narrowing as she looked him over. "You did well," she said quietly, "but this is only the second trial. There's still more to prove." Derek nodded, his gaze steady. "I'm ready for whatever comes next." The final trial was upon them. Derek had endured the harsh terrain, survived the deadly creatures of Zarkar Prime, and even managed to outwit Sakthar's warriors. But nothing had prepared him for what was coming next. He stood at the edge of a massive arena, surrounded by tall, jagged cliffs. The wind howled through the narrow passageways, sending dust and dirt swirling into the air. This was a place where battles had been fought for generations, and only the strongest had survived. The Zarkar warriors had called it the Gauntlet. To pass the trial, Derek would have to face his greatest challenge yet. Not a single opponent, but a series of grueling tests designed to push him to his physical and mental limits. Sakthar stood beside him, his four arms crossed over his chest, eyes scanning the arena. His expression was unreadable. He had seen countless warriors fail in this trial, their bodies broken, their spirits crushed. But Derek wasn't like the others. He had already proven himself. Still, Sakthar knew the final test was far more than just a battle of strength. It was about heart, about willpower, and about the ability to never give up. "You will face 3 trials in the gauntlet," Sakthar said, his voice low and commanding. "The first will test your physical endurance, the second will test your mind, and the third will test your soul." Derek nodded, feeling the weight of Sakthar's words. He had made it this far, but he knew the hardest part was yet to come. He wasn't sure how he would fare in these trials, but he wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not after everything he had been through. The first trial began with a deafening horn that echoed across the arena. The ground shook beneath Derek's feet as a massive stone door slowly creaked open. Behind it, a huge, towering figure stepped out. It was a creature, a beast unlike anything Derek had ever seen. It was covered in thick, armored plates, its eyes glowing with a ferocious light. The creature roared, sending a wave of fear through the air. Derek's heart raced as the creature charged at him, its massive claws reaching for him. He had no weapons, no armor, only his training and his instincts. As the creature lunged, Derek ducked under its swipe, rolling to the side. He scrambled to his feet, adrenaline pumping through his veins. The creature wasn't going to stop. It was relentless, its every movement designed to crush anything in its path. Derek's mind raced as he darted around, looking for a way to outmaneuver it. There was no way he could defeat the beast head-on, but there had to be another way. As the creature lunged again, Derek spotted a rock pillar rising from the ground in the corner of the arena. He sprinted toward it, leading the creature after him. With a sudden twist, Derek jumped, using the pillar as leverage to propel himself higher. The beast followed, but it was too slow. As it reached the pillar, Derek grabbed onto the top, pulling himself out of its reach. The creature roared in frustration, pacing beneath him. Derek, breathing heavily, waited. He had to think. The creature's claws scraped against the pillar, trying to climb, but it wasn't fast enough. Derek's mind was spinning. He couldn't outrun it forever, but he could use its anger against it. He climbed higher, moving to the edge of the pillar. The creature, enraged, kept pushing against it. With a deep breath, Derek leapt from the pillar, landing on the creature's back. He grabbed hold of its armored neck, using all his weight to force it off balance. The creature stumbled, crashing into the ground with a thunderous roar. Derek scrambled off, his muscles screaming in protest, and backed away as the creature struggled to rise. It was disoriented but still alive. Derek didn't want to kill it, he just needed to survive. He sprinted toward the nearest exit, his legs burning with exhaustion. The creature roared behind him, but Derek was faster. As he crossed the finish line of the first trial, the horn sounded again. Derek collapsed to his knees, gasping for air. He had survived. Sakthar's deep voice echoed through the arena. "The first trial is complete. Now for the second." Derek barely had time to catch his breath before the second trial began. This one was different. The ground before him shifted, and a large holographic screen appeared. Words flashed across it, words he couldn't understand. They were in a language he didn't recognize, one he had never seen before. "You must solve the riddle," Sakthar's voice came from behind him. "It is the key to unlocking the next trial." Derek stared at the screen, his mind racing. He wasn't sure how he was supposed to solve the riddle, but he knew he couldn't afford to waste time. He took a deep breath, focusing on the symbols before him. It was like a puzzle, each symbol connected to another, forming a pattern. He studied the riddle, remembering what Zyra had taught him about thinking strategically. This wasn't just about brute force, it was about understanding, about finding the logic beneath the chaos. The symbols began to make sense. Derek quickly pressed the correct sequence of buttons on the holographic screen. The symbols changed, rearranging themselves in a new pattern. With a final press, the screen flickered, and the door to the next section of the arena slowly opened. "The second trial is complete," Sakthar announced. "Now the final test awaits." Derek's heart pounded in his chest. The final test. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he knew this was where everything would come together. This was the test that would determine whether he had what it took to prove himself to Sakthar and to the Zarkar people. As he stepped into the next section of the arena, the air seemed to grow colder. The ground beneath him felt unstable, as if something was shifting. He didn't know what was happening, but he knew one thing. The final trial was going to push him further than he ever thought possible. The lights dimmed, and a deep voice echoed from the shadows. "You've made it this far, human, but now you must face your greatest fear." Suddenly, the floor gave way beneath Derek's feet, and he fell into darkness. The sensation of falling lasted for what felt like an eternity. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. Was this part of the trial, or had something gone wrong? When he finally landed, the fall wasn't as painful as he had expected. Derek found himself in a small, dimly lit chamber. The walls seemed to pulse with a strange energy. He stood up, brushing the dirt off his clothes, and took a cautious step forward. It wasn't the dark that scared him, it was the feeling of being alone, the feeling of being completely vulnerable. A figure appeared before him, silhouetted by the dim light. Derek's heart stopped. The figure was human, but it was wrong. The face was his own, but twisted in a way that made it unrecognizable. It was a version of himself, a darker, distorted version. "You think you're ready to lead?" the figure asked, its voice a hollow echo of his own. "You think you're strong enough to survive this trial? Then face your doubts, your fears, face yourself." Derek swallowed hard, his throat dry. He had come this far, but this was something else entirely. The figure in front of him seemed to mock him, reminding him of all the moments when he had doubted himself, when he had almost given up. But he knew he couldn't let fear control him. With a deep breath, Derek took a step forward. "I'm not afraid of you," he said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. The figure grinned, its eyes cold. "Prove it." Derek's breath was shallow, his heart pounding in his chest as he faced the distorted figure of himself in the dimly lit chamber. The walls seemed to close in around him, the air thick with the oppressive weight of his own fears. The figure stood before him, a twisted version of his own reflection, its eyes cold and judgmental. Derek could feel his pulse racing, his stomach churning with uncertainty. The figure spoke, its voice a hollow echo of his own. "You think you're ready to lead, to win Zyra's heart, to prove yourself to Sakthar? What makes you so sure?" Derek's hands trembled slightly, but he clenched them into fists, determined not to show weakness. He had faced physical challenges, had survived in the wilderness, and had beaten creatures far stronger than him. But this was different. This was about facing the doubts that had always haunted him, the insecurities he'd buried deep within. He'd always felt like an outsider in the galaxy, never quite measuring up to the strength and power of the aliens around him. He had always doubted that he could be more than just a human diplomat, an outsider trying to prove himself. "You're not good enough," the figure continued, stepping closer. "You don't have the strength to beat Sakthar, you're not worthy of Zyra, you'll never be more than a joke." The words hit Derek like a punch to the gut. He could feel the weight of his own self-doubt creeping in, threatening to pull him under. But he wasn't going to let it happen. He had made it this far. He had survived the trials. He had proven himself time and time again. And now this twisted version of himself wanted to tear him down. But Derek wouldn't let it. He had learned that strength wasn't just about power. It was about resilience, about overcoming the darkness inside. "Shut up," Derek muttered under his breath. His voice was shaky, but he spoke with conviction. "I'm not going to listen to you." The figure smirked, its expression mocking. "You can't silence me. I am your doubt, your fear. I am everything you've ever thought about yourself." Derek took a deep breath. His mind flashed back to everything he had been through. The first trial, the second, the endless hours of training, the battles he had fought, the mistakes he had made. He had come so far, and he couldn't let this fear take him down now. "You're wrong," Derek said, his voice steady now. "I fought harder than I've ever fought before. I've survived things that would have killed others, and I'm not done. I've got more to give." With those words, Derek took a step forward, his eyes locked onto the figure. The image of himself flickered for a moment, like a shadow in the darkness, before it solidified once more. "You think you can defeat me?" the figure sneered. "I don't need to defeat you," Derek replied. "I need to defeat the fear you represent. You don't control me anymore." The figure's form wavered, and for a brief moment Derek thought it might disappear entirely. But instead it lunged toward him, its hands reaching out to choke him. Derek didn't hesitate. He ducked under the figure's grasp and spun to the side, using the momentum to slam his shoulder into the figure's chest. The force knocked it back, and for the first time, Derek saw the doubt in its eyes. It wasn't invincible. It was just a reflection of his own fears, and it could be defeated. "You're just a part of me," Derek said, stepping forward again, "and I can control you." With a final, determined push, Derek reached out and grabbed the figure's arm, twisting it and forcing it to the ground. The figure writhed beneath him, but Derek held it down, his own body trembling with exhaustion. He was so tired, his muscles sore from the trials, but he wouldn't stop. Not now, not when he was so close. The figure's mocking grin faded as Derek pinned it to the ground. "You're just a part of me," he repeated more firmly this time. "You don't control me anymore." The figure struggled for a moment longer, but then, slowly, it faded away, leaving Derek alone in the chamber. The walls around him began to shift, the dark energy receding, and the light in the room grew brighter. Derek felt the weight lift off his shoulders, the oppressive fear that had held him in its grip slipping away. He stood there for a moment, breathing heavily, his mind racing. Had he really just faced his own fears? Had he truly conquered the doubt that had plagued him for so long? He didn't know for sure, but one thing was clear. He had passed the final trial. He had overcome the greatest challenge he would ever face, himself. The door to the chamber slowly opened, and Derek stepped through it, his heart still pounding. He was met by Sakthar, who stood in silence, watching him closely. "You have passed the final trial," Sakthar said, his voice low but filled with approval. "You have shown not just strength, but the will to survive, to fight against your own fears. You have earned my respect, human." Derek looked up at the towering warrior, his own chest swelling with pride. He hadn't just survived the trials. He had proven to himself that he was stronger than he had ever imagined. "You've earned more than just my respect," Sakthar continued. "You've earned your place among us. You are a warrior not because of your strength, but because of your heart. And that is something no one can take from you." Derek smiled, feeling a sense of accomplishment flood through him. He had done it. He had earned his place, not just in the Zarkar's world, but in his own. "And Zyra?" Derek asked, his voice quiet but steady. Sakthar's gaze softened for a moment. "Zyra is free to choose her path. If she chooses you, she will follow you. But know this, her heart will never be won by force. It is something you must earn, just as you have earned my respect." Derek nodded. He understood now. The trials weren't just about winning Zyra's hand. They were about proving his worth, not just to her, but to himself. As the gates to the arena opened, Derek stepped forward, ready to face whatever came next. The galaxy was vast, and he had much to learn, but he wasn't afraid anymore. He had faced his darkest fears, and he had come out stronger on the other side. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain: he was ready. Ready to face the unknown, ready to lead, and ready to carve his own place in this galaxy. And with that, he walked forward into the light, his heart full of hope for the first time in his life.